All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Lasting Learning Podcast. Those of you that are watching, you can already see who's here. I have an absolutely verifiable, amazing, spectacular, phenomenal educator, leader, speaker, writer, person. Don't believe me? Check out her Twitter. She's got the little blue check mark that verifies this for us. She is amazing. She is a New York Times best-selling author. She is groundbreaking. She's got celebrities endorsing her work, sitting in beach chairs in California.
Okay, that was weird. We will have to talk about that.
We will.
That was weird.
But it was amazing. I have the one, the only, Jessica Lahey with Lahey. Wow, I can't even say it. I'm so starstruck. Jessica Lahey with me today to just share some wisdom. So Jessica, I know there's nobody out there that doesn't know you, but on the off chance there's one or two people listening that have never heard you or what you're about, can you just introduce yourself real quick?
So I am a teacher. I've been a teacher for 20 years. I'm not, just to put this out there, since there's a big thing on Twitter right now about edu celebrities who aren't actually in the classroom.
Edu rock stars.
Right,
yes.
Exactly. So I started teaching when my kid, who's just about to turn 21, when I was pregnant with him. And I actually was going to be an attorney. I was at law school, University of North Carolina, go Heels. I was going to be a juvenile attorney. And during the summer of my second year, I was asked to teach a class at the Duke University Talent Identification Program, summer program for sort of highly exceptional kids. And I just fell totally in love. I mean, that was it. I make the joke all the time that I came home from teaching that first day and my husband took one look at me and said, "Are you even going to finish law school?" I mean, it was just, I was so sunk. And that was middle school age kids, actually. That was kids from like 12 to 14, 15. And I did finish law school, but I went straight into teaching. I went straight into a job teaching at a school in Utah called Roland Hall St. Mark's. I taught English. I was just telling someone downstairs at the conference that I was talking to a student teacher, actually. And he was talking about how overwhelming it is. And I told him that I got my first full-time teaching job 2 days before school started.
Wow.
And they showed me where the book closet was. And I said, "So, what's the syllabus?" And they're like, "Well, that's up to you." It was crazy. It was trial by fire. I pity those poor students who had to struggle along with me. I was like 24 hours ahead of them. Anyway, so I kept teaching, taught high school, taught middle school, which was a turning point for me. And then for the past 5 years, I've taught English and writing in an inpatient drug and alcohol rehab for teens. I'm an alcoholic myself. I have 6.5 years of recovery. And a year into my recovery, I started teaching there, which has been obviously not only the coolest, I say obviously the coolest teaching experience I've ever had. Most people would be like, that sounds like a total nightmare. Because if you take kids who don't want to be in rehab, and then tell them they also have to go to school in rehab, my game had to go way up.
If you can do that, though, you can do anything.
I've had kids, I had a kid jump out the window and flee, like run away, and that was horrible. But anyway, so I did that for the past 5 years, and unfortunately they closed the drug and alcohol rehab where I worked. It just wasn't cost effective to treat teenagers.
Right.
So since then, it's been me and the writing and a lot of speaking. But I've been in English. I've taught every grade from 6 to 12. And that's where my heart lies. And so I'm trying, I try to remind myself that even if I'm not in the classroom full time, I get to be out there teaching. I often go speak at schools where I talk to the kids, and then I do professional development for the faculty in the afternoon. And then I do the parents in the evening in an attempt to sort of get everyone on the same page in terms of vocabulary and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, right for the Atlantic, New York Times. And it was actually a piece in the Atlantic that led to the book. This came out of an article that was in the Atlantic in 2013, I think.
So good. So I know there are some people that are listening to this simply because you're here. There are some people that listen to this because it's my own circle. So for those people that are listening because of me, you already know this. I am a Jessica groupie. So I'm just putting that out there so the creep factor just elevated in the room here. There are a couple people in this world that I worship. Tim McGraw, I will go see Tim McGraw if he's anywhere within 200 miles. And I will track down Jessica Lahey in Nashville, Tennessee, so that I can record a podcast episode.
Doesn't Tim McGraw live around here somewhere?
Oh, yes, he does.
It
is. So watch out, Tim. I'm recording you tomorrow. No. And the thing is about you, Jessica, and I'll just be blunt.
Okay.
The book, awesome. If you haven't read it, go read it.
Thank you.
But you're even better. And I think that is what is super cool about you. So I've had the chance to hear you speak, probably more than you know. I'm always like,
that's super creepy.
See, before you agreed to this first. So
are we talking like, was I at the grocery store or was I actually?
I've heard you drop the mic and give some wisdom and just be completely real. And I think that's what I really appreciate about you. You don't stand on a pulpit and preach the message that you're not practicing yourself. You know, you started this off by saying that you are a teacher, first and foremost. But beyond that, the book, The Gift of Failure. I love the fact that you are so authentic and real about the things that you've had to overcome, and that you don't glorify it. You don't use it to try to manipulate and spin and try to garner respect and rapport and status. It's just real.
As a middle school teacher, the minute you start to manipulate, the minute you start to say anything that's not completely authentic, the kids are onto you. Yeah. I mean, there's no, am I allowed to say?
You can say whatever you want to say.
There's no bullshit when it comes to kids, because especially addicted teenagers. Like for me, that has been such a gift to my teaching, because I can't bullshit them. I can't give up on them. And I have to talk to them where they are. When I ask parents, please, to like parent the kid they have, not the kid they wish they had, I say to them, I can't go into my classroom and teach the kids I wish I had, as opposed to, the kids I actually have. And that sort of no bullshit policy, it gets me in trouble from time to time, because I do say stuff that makes people mad. But the other part of that, though, is so there are occasionally times that I'll pick my battles. I use the words, for example, directive parenting instead of controlling parenting, because no one wants to hear the word controlling parenting. That just sounds mean. So I say directive instead, because I'm going to piss them off later on, and I need for them to be with me. And the other thing about writing is no one is going to read if you piss them off and you alienate them. So the first thing you have to be able to do is to not alienate people.
So I'm going to go at this a little bit, because this is what's so fascinating. I've been known to poke the bear a few times in my life as well.
Because it's super fun.
It is. it does give you that high and that quick adrenaline rush, and you feel not powerful, but you do start to feel like you're making some progress.
Well, and as a teacher, you have to do it. Like, I taught.
Well, you don't have to. If you're an effective teacher, you have to.
Well, I mean, I taught in a school where we did, these writing assessments every year, and it was like what we'd done for 20 years, and no one ever thought to just say, okay, why do we do these, and is this an effective tool? And it turns out it was, but stopping to ask why, people were like, no, you don't ask why, you just keep doing it. That's what we do here. And that's crap. Anyway, sorry. Poking bears. Back to poking bears.
I guess I want to talk about this like on the business side of things, because your business right now is based off of your book and your speaking engagements and getting people to buy into the message. But yet your message also, like you just said, pisses a lot of people off. Yeah. So how do you find that balance? Is it just Jessica being authentic and real and true to who you are and what you believe?
I think being honest, number one, works. It works with kids. It works with parents. I think admitting that I don't always have the answers. I mean, one of the things I used to do as on my plan book, I always had a piece of paper on the front to write down all of the questions I didn't know the answers to, because I would go home and look them up, and I would make sure that I got back to the kid. And I even do that in my speaking engagements now. If I don't have a good answer to a question a parent poses for me, I get their email and I make sure to say that, I'm going to get back to them. And I do, because you have to. That not always having the answers, being honest about the fact that I made that same mistake, and here's how I screwed it up, and here's how I fixed it. But I think the big overarching message in my work is we have to be able to admit when we make mistakes. We have to model for kids our positive adaptive response when we make mistakes. So if I say, something wrong in the classroom, or teach something incorrect, or show them, I wrote a piece for someplace, I can't remember where. Anyway, I wrote something about the fact that.
Sorry, that's when you know you're big time right there. Just one, maybe it was the Atlantic, maybe, who knows?
Oh no, it was for, there's a wonderful anthology from Simon & Schuster called On Being 40-ish.
Okay.
And it was essentially about the things we've learned, the things I've learned, and I barely made it under the wire because I'm almost 50. But I talked about the fact that I had a student that teaching in the rehab, the one thing I can't do is get emotional, and I also can't give up on them, and I can't throw them out of the room. Wow. I can't give, because every other adult has always given up on them, and so I can't be just another one. And I learned that because I got angry at a student, and I threw her out of my class, and that was it. I lost her. She's gone forever to me. I was never getting her trust back. She never had any respect for me ever again. And I now go into all of these sort of moments with students or with parents saying, look, this is me doing the best I can do, and I want to learn from this situation, and I have to model my willingness to admit when I've made my mistakes and to talk about my positive adaptive response to those mistakes. And I certainly can't ask my kids to be, and when I say kids, as you well know, I mean my students and my kids, I can't expect them to have a healthy response to making mistakes and a healthy response to learn, a healthy sort of view of learning if I'm not modeling that for them. So there's a lot of self-deprecation without tearing myself down. There's a total abhorrence for shame. My next book is about preventing substance abuse in kids, and the big battle that we fight against effective prevention programs and effective prevention of substance abuse in the family is an unwillingness to talk about it and to feel shame. I'm an alcoholic. I talk to my kids about that. I talk to my kids about my recovery. I talk to my kids about the things I've done wrong. And so I take that sort of total abhorrence of shame to the stage with me. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that people respond to Brene Brown. There's a reason that people respond to Glennon Doyle. And that's because they're what they call truth tellers. But really, for me, it just has to do with the fact that I just, if I am ashamed of something, I'm probably going to talk about it more, because that's the only way that we get rid of that. So I could stand around being really ashamed of the fact that I was raising my kid to be dependent. I was raising my kid to be completely reliant on extrinsic motivators like grades and points and scores, or money for grades or whatever. Or I could try to fix it and talk about how I fixed it. And that's more fun anyway.
Well, and I think it's one of the other reasons I really appreciate you. So I'm going to make a connection between you and Tim McGraw.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go.
Now you have to know, I am not a country music person.
Right.
However, my cousin Shannon. Hi, cousin Shannon. She is a TV anchor in Oklahoma and was on the radio for a long time at KVOO, and she big time music person. So I'm gonna have to tell her that I got compared to Tim McGraw. Okay. She is going to be so excited.
So here's the thing with Tim McGraw. First of all, he doesn't write his own music for the most part, which is where you guys separate. But the reason I appreciate his music so much is because it always speaks to me. And most of the time, it's like a slap across the face with the lyrics. And it's one of those, you'll be listening to it, and you'll sing along, and then afterwards you think to yourself, did I just say that out loud?
Okay, you got to tell me what Tim McGraw song do I have to
I will give you a list.
Okay, give me a list.
I'll share my playlist with you when we're
done.
Right. So
I promise I'll listen.
We're in Nashville, so you got to listen. But that's what I appreciate about you too. So the first time I heard you, I was one of those people in the room looking around like, oh, she's talking to everybody else. And then afterwards, I remember I was driving home, and it was like I got this gut punch, because my oldest son, he couldn't tie his shoes till he was 8 years old. Not for anybody's reason. It was my fault.
Mine was 9, so
okay.
I still.
So mine was 8, and it was because Daddy, my shoe's untied, and I would tie his shoe. Before I came here to Nashville, 3 days ago, he's gonna be 14 next week. He came to me and said, "Dad, can you put some cream cheese on my bagel?" And I walked over, and I was gonna put cream cheese on his freaking bagel, as opposed to, no, figure it out yourself, dude. And
the stakes are pretty low with cream cheese.
It is. However, it in my head, it makes life so much easier right now when he's 12, 13, 14 years old. But God bless America, what's he going to be like when he's 30, 40, 50 years old, and he's still dependent on everybody else to do things for him?
So every single time that happens, so the big takeaways are the things that people always want me to give them at the end. Like, how do I walk out of here and think differently?
How do I do it differently?
Right. So the big thing I have to do every single day, number one, is I have to think about, do I want to, well, first of all, I have to think about process over product. Like I talk about that with teachers all the time, and how we can talk to parents. If we're constantly putting our focus on the process of learning as opposed to the end product, we're going to go a long way. So in that, we can talk about, high grades and low grades the same way, and not end up, using our love for our kids as some kind of currency for their performance. But so process over product, process of becoming better, process of doing better. But more to the point on what you're talking about, this long-term view of parenting. Like, do I want to make these next 2 minutes go faster, or do I want my kid in a month, 2 months, 6 months to know how to do this, him or herself? And in the moment, it might take longer, and it probably will take longer to help your kid be the kind of kid that next time they will be able to do it themselves. Totally worth it though, because the next time, like, there's so much in that. There's your ability to look at your kid doing this thing that they couldn't do a month ago, and you get to feel all good about yourself. And at the same time, they get to feel competent, and they get to feel like they've had learning has happened, and they're they've got mastery. They've got this thing called self-efficacy. They've got the ability. They look at me, Dad, look what I'm doing. I couldn't do this a month ago, and now I can do this. And that lasts way longer than the momentary, oh, we can save 30 seconds if I just tie your shoe. But it's our default thing. So every single time my students, and here's the other thing. We as teachers, I as a teacher, tend to silo my brain. I've got my teacher side and I have my parent side. So all these effective things I'm doing in my classroom, like the stuff I'm doing with my advisees, with goal setting and prioritizing short-term goals and long-term goals, and thinking about a strengths-based approach to things, out the window. Because when I go home, I'm not talking about goals with my kid. I'm not always doing a strengths-based approach to my parenting, even though it's what I do in my classroom. So I really do have to pause when I feel the need to just get in there and fix it, to think more long-term, to think, do I want to fix it now, or do I want him to be able to do it himself next time?
So, talking about how that works when you're presenting to people too, because so tomorrow, for example, you're going to be presenting in front of 3,000 teachers that are sitting there listening to Jessica, wanting Jessica to say, here's what you have to do to fix it. Give me the playbook. And you've got a book, but it's not the playbook, if you will. It's one of those books that continues to just poke that bear and makes you sit back and process things, so that 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, you're still thinking, holy crap, there's so much I have to continue to grow into. How do you respond to that tomorrow, when you've got all these people saying, they're saying, no, just feed me. Give me the answers today.
There's a huge, so what's really hard is in my speaking events, I can't do a how-to on, because the book is really divided. I think of it, the book is divided up into sort of the research on motivation and all that sort of stuff, and learning. But, the super dorky fun stuff. And then there's like the homework, the household duties, the sports, all that sort of stuff. And what I used to do is give the broad strokes and then pick one thing like homework, and give a real sort of practical, how to on that. And I don't tend to do that as much anymore. What I try to do now is to paint the broad strokes. Tomorrow I'm really lucky because I get to do the keynote, but then I get to do breakout sessions after, where I can really, and I did this yesterday. I gave a 15-minute style TED talk where talk about broad strokes, big broad strokes. But then I had an hour to say, okay, now let's talk about how the research works in application. But I can't do that in a big keynote. I can't give you instructions about how you can motivate your kid to do their chores, that kind of thing. So I got to do broad strokes, and then I have to leave you with takeaways, but they have to be takeaways that are applicable to lots of different situations. So process over product, long-term, sort of that thinking long-term, not short-term, that kind of stuff, so that, because that applies to homework, that applies to household duties, that applies to sports, that kind of thing. It's a really hard thing, because what I want to do when I have a speaking event is say, okay, I'm just going to give you all the information you want. And I don't get a Q&A for a keynote. So at like a school, for example, I'll do an hour broad strokes gift to failure, research-based stuff. And then, and you'll recognize some of the teaching tools I use. I put my body in certain places on the stage to signal certain concepts, so that recall is easier. But when it comes to then the parent stuff, I often will have the Q&A and they can ask specific questions. What I did though is I recently decided, okay, well, I can't answer every single email I get, and I can't answer every question at events. So I have a group of YouTube videos. I have a YouTube channel, and they're Gift of Failure Frequently Asked Questions. So I basically just took the questions I get most, answered those in like 10-minute videos and put those out there. So when someone emails me with a question, I can say, I've already answered that, here's the video, or if it's something unique or something I haven't heard. But honestly, the questions come down to like 6 things.
Yeah. I'm gonna take this and kind of go personal, if you will.
Yeah.
Were you a good parent?
So I've been married to my husband for 25 years. He and I were very different in our parenting styles. When I first became a parent, I was very big on parental authority. I'm very big into the why because I'm a teacher. You know, I've never been a just do it this way because I said so kind of parent. But I also felt it was really important that my kids have respect for me by virtue of the fact that I existed there as their parent.
Right.
And that my husband, I think, was smarter about that. He was more of a, well, no, we need to talk it out. They need to understand our thinking, blah, blah, blah. And I think we've sort of managed to meet in this place where I want to earn their respect. I don't feel that a child, mainly because I've had a lot of students who have no respect for their parents because they've had terrible parents who don't care about them. I can't expect my child to just simply respect me because I exist as in this place. I do need to earn their respect, and I want them to respect me because I'm modeling the behaviors I want to see from them. And I think that's been a growth for me. And that's come out of, number one, knowing the research. Number two, reading Carol Dweck's Mindset. I mean, that changed a lot for me, not just about my parenting, but about my learning. I had been told, this is a total tangent, but I had been told in 7th grade that I was not a math person. I was told that I was bad at math, essentially. It was a big what not to do moment as a teacher, and I believed him. And so I went through my life afraid of, calculating tips and afraid of taxes and afraid of, I would get brain freeze when I did math. And then I read Carol Dweck's Mindset, and I just got so pissed off at that teacher and pissed off at myself for believing him, that I wasn't a math person. I mean, how dare he?
Right.
And it was this moment, it was this small moment that I just swallowed and took into my being. And so I was teaching, this is when I was teaching middle school. My older son was in Algebra 1, and Algebra 1 had been the class where this happened. So I took it again as in my 40s. My colleague Allison Gorman was she's one of the best math teachers I've ever seen. It was during my 3 times a week. It was during my 1 prep period because I had 7 preps.
Wow.
But I retook Algebra 1 with her and with my students and with my kid. And it was one of the best things I've ever done because it turns out I'm not bad at math. I actually am pretty good at math. It doesn't come as naturally to me as I would like, but that's because math's hard. It shouldn't, it's not, I mean,
it's supposed to be hard, yeah.
Anyway, rah, Carol Dweck, I think for me, being a teacher has made me a better parent, and also learning not to silo my teacher brain and my parent brain, applying more of what I do as a teacher. When a kid raises their hand in your class and they need help, you don't go there and just give them the answer. You go there and you help them discover the answer. You guide them, you support them. You're the sounding board for them while they work it out themselves, even if it's just reading the instructions for the whatever again. I've gotten better at bringing those practices home. And I was just starting out as a teacher when I became a parent. But I hope my kids would say that. I mean, it's also hard, total honesty here. It's really hard for a kid to be my kid. I mean, my book, Gift of Failure, is dedicated to my 2 sons. One is about to turn 21. He's in college. One is just turned 16, and he's not only in Gift of Failure all over the place. He's in my New York Times articles. I've never written about him without asking his permission, without talking it through with him about what it means. But I think he's over that now. And,
Okay.
and, you know, my kids will even say things to me like, could you stop pulling that gift of failure crap and just do this for us? That happens a lot. Yeah, it's hard to be a parent, period. It's also very difficult to be a parent who writes about parenting, because everyone expects, you know, I'm sitting here looking, in fact, I have all these parenting books right here because I'm giving some away tomorrow. So this person here, this was my editor at the New York Times. And she writes about how to be a happier parent, but people look at her and they're like, oh, you have 4 kids. It must be so idyllic and wonderful. And you live on a farm and you wrote about being a happier parent. She's not happy all the time.
Right.
Or, you know, like these, you know, all of these people who, and Grown and Flown is a great book about raising older kids, but none of these people are perfect parents, but they just happen to also be good writers and happen to like listening to other people and translating the research.
I feel like there are 1,000 different directions I can go with all that, because my mind is just.
That's fine.
So
actually, will you hand me that water over there, and feel free to take one if you want.
I'm good. So this episode might be like 5 hours long.
Okay.
It won't be, but I'm just warning
the
listeners.
longest one I've ever done is Rich Roll has a podcast.
Yeah.
And I think it ran like 2 hours.
Well,
and he's an ultra guy. He's an ultra marathoner, ultra sport guy. And I was like, really? We could go for it. He's like, yeah, I'm an ultra guy. I do everything. Really.
That's awesome. I guess the direction I want to go first, I'm talking about your Algebra 1 experience.
Yeah.
And being told you're not a math person.
Right.
You talk a lot about labels.
Yeah.
And the impact they can have on kids or grown-ups. I mean, you're this proclaimed expert on parenting and expert on teaching, yet you have epic failures, I'm sure, as a parent from time to time. You have epic fails when you're engaging with people in person and teaching them. Things are never perfect. But sometimes, you know, we focus a lot on the labels for the at-risk kids and the issues that can cause. We have just as many issues at times with the labels on the other end of the extreme. When you call people experts or gifted. Right. I was one of those people, I'll tell you. When I was young, I was given that label of gifted. So I was told, I wasn't told, but I started to believe then everything's just going to come easy to me.
Yep.
And
like math.
Right. So that first time something doesn't go right, and for me, that first thing that didn't go right, it didn't happen until I was in college.
Yeah.
Outside of the traditional K-12 setting.
That must have been devastating.
It was. The story is, I was going into broadcasting. I'm a teacher now because I failed a broadcasting class and said, screw it. This professor's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's doing. The program is messed up. They don't know what they're talking about. Yeah. So I completely changed course of my career because I believed if things didn't come easy to me, it was always going to be somebody else's fault. That then translated, I mean, I've had so many issues in my life now because of that.
It's someone else's fault, or you can do what I did. Here's my story about that. I went to law school to be a juvenile attorney. I was so dedicated. I was so into it. Didn't take the practice exam because I've always been smart. I've always been smart. Why do I need to take the practice exam? And so I took my first exam in law school, and I did not know if I failed it or got a D because I'd never gotten a grade that low. So I didn't know what the number meant. And I was devastated. And my first thought was not, let's go talk to the professor. Next time I should take the practice exam. It was, I must quit law school immediately.
Right.
So I started to walk to the dean's office, and my best friend at the time intercepted me. Thank goodness. And she said, or, sure, you could quit, feel free, or we could go talk to the professor about what went wrong. And we did. And the professor was great. I mean, I cried in his office, but the professor was fantastic. And he was like, yeah, I was really surprised you did that poorly too. You know, in class, you're so engaged, but you made 3 simple mistakes. Let's talk about them. And the next time I didn't make those 3 simple mistakes, and I did great. But that's what I don't want for kids. Like, the reason I do this is I do not want kids to have such a fixed mindset. Yes. Thank you, Carol Dweck, that they come out of an exam when they're, whatever I was, 24 years old, and think, I can't do this. And not that and if I quit quickly, no one will find out, and no one will ever have to know that this happened. I can just give some excuse for, law school just wasn't for me, kind of thing.
I mean, I relate to that so much. I said that I failed a class, so I became a teacher.
Right.
As a teacher, after 1 year, a true story again, I thought I had all the answers. I was the best teacher ever. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go get my master's, get my ed leadership degree.
Right.
After teaching for 2 years, I thought I was prepared to be a principal. Went on 16 interviews, didn't get a single call back. So I said, these people are a bunch of idiots. This is why the school systems are broken. I went to law school and said, I'm going to go be a lawyer then that's going to sue these stupid school systems because they don't know what they're talking about.
I would have hated you.
Right? But it was, I got myself into this loop of the blame game.
Right.
And then as years went by, a couple decades into my career, I didn't necessarily blame people for my failures. I just simply started hiding my failures.
Yeah.
And I put myself in this world where I was addicted to my facade. We talk about addictions all the time. Yep. I was addicted to only letting people see the good in me. I became addicted to the social media, always having a smile with 15 filters, you know, whatever, and never being real and vulnerable. And that scared the hell out of me, like flat out, to the point where the smallest failure in my eyes, where somebody could see the real me and I saw myself as a real failure, caused me to think these deep, dark thoughts where I've had to check myself into the hospital, get on medication, the whole 9 yards because of fear, not of failure, but being seen as a failure.
Yeah.
I put that out there because there are some people that take the gift of failure and they don't read it. Number one, they look at the title and they say, oh, you're glorifying failure.
Right.
You're saying it's okay to just mess up all the time. How are kids ever really going to learn? And the answer is, well, they learn through failure, but are you just telling people they just need to live their lives as failures and they shouldn't strive to be good and perfect?
It's totally valid. There was a real conversation with my publisher, my editor at my publishing at Harper Books. They always liked the title, but there was also an understanding that it was a scary title. And I always say when I'm speaking about it is that, I absolutely don't want kids to fail. I would be a teacher if I wanted kids to fail. I do want them to have a positive adaptive response when they do, and they're going to at some point. And in middle school, more often than not. I mean, I stealing bits of my keynote from tomorrow, but our job as middle school teachers,
after tomorrow, so we're good.
Our job as teachers is to walk around and watch kids screw up all day long and to pick the moments when they are most receptive to learning to do better next time. And so that sort of, and I had a bunch of students over, when sort of the genesis of this book was happening, when this book was sort of first percolating, I had students who would do that sort of like disassociate, go off to their happy place, look at you blankly when you started to give them, constructive feedback, because it was so hard for them to hear anything negative about themselves or their skills. I had students who couldn't write rough drafts because rough drafts are too scary because they're not perfect. It's not like, liquid gold flowing from the pen. And increasingly, kids' fear of making mistakes was getting in the way of their learning. So there were two things that were happening. Gift of failure is really about two separate things. It's about us mucking up their motivation by doing lots of extrinsic motivators, grades, points, scores, money for grades, and surveillance and other controlling sort of stuff, threats, if you don't keep a B or better, you're grounded, all that sort of stuff. Those are extrinsic motivators. They do not work over the long term for learning. So there's that side of it. But then there's also the side that I was starting to worry that all of the helicopter, snowplow, controlling, directive, whatever words you want to use about the way we parent, that sort of always there with the help, always there to clean things up, that was not only messing with kids' motivation, it was messing with their learning. And now I'm pissed because you're getting in my lane now. And that was causing me to be angry at the parents of my students. And as we know, the research is really clear that the better homeschool relationships are, the better kids learn. So that was a mistake. That's a problem. So how do we not only keep the kids motivated, how do we help them be really best able to learn, and how do we improve relationships between parents and teachers? And I joke all the time, I wrote this book for teachers. I didn't, yes, it's a parenting book, and it's easier for, like, publishers are pretty good at, big publishers are really good at marketing parenting books, but education books, they're not really sure what to do with.
Right.
So I said, fine, you take care of the parenting marketing stuff and I'll take care of the education side, because this is an education book. But when you go to the bookstore and look for it, it's always in the parenting section. And also because sometimes there isn't an education section.
Yes, true story.
But this is a book that is really also to help us repair relationships with parents, for us to know how to communicate with parents, which is why doing professional development is so much fun for me. But there are these 3 different things I try to cover in the book, but it all comes down to how do we help kids stay motivated, continue to learn, think of themselves as competent learners, and how do we keep those homeschool relationships solid. And I've gone so far afield at this point, I have no idea what the original.
No, you're good. No, you're hitting it. You're all about it. It's all good. So I'm gonna take you back a little bit. I'm gonna ask a question. I know I'm gonna oversimplify this.
Okay.
And this is where you correct me, or maybe I'm not, but I think I am.
But see here, I tell my students not to do this all the time.
I know.
You have now predisposed me to assume that you're going to get it wrong, so don't do that.
Okay.
That's like saying, this is going to suck. This is wrong.
Well, okay, this is going to be so spot on.
Okay, yeah, tell me.
But the reality is I don't know your world. I don't know your life. So the oversimplification is 6.5 years ago, your life changed.
Yeah.
You went into recovery and have started to see the world differently.
Yeah.
And I would also argue over the last 6.5 years, success, however you want to define success, has dramatically increased in your world.
Well, and I want to make one thing really, really clear. So I got sober because I had needed to get sober for a while, but I got sober because my dad, who was raised with addiction, it's not my story to tell, but he had been raised around a lot of addiction, and he had gotten very, very good at ignoring it and pretending it wasn't happening, because that was his defense for the situation. My father came to me and he said, this was right after the book sold. So, article in the Atlantic, it was such a crazy thing. I was teaching full time, article in the Atlantic went viral. Suddenly publishers are coming to me. I finally signed with the agent I'd been chasing for 10 years, who had been saying, no, because these projects just aren't right. But we liked each other, but it wasn't going to work. Suddenly I have this agent, and suddenly we're faced with a situation where it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that we have a huge auction for this book. And so we had 14 publishers, I think it was 13 or 14, in a round robin auction for the book. And so I got a huge amount of money for the book. Expectations were really high, and I was drinking too much. I was drinking a lot too much. And my father came to me and he said, essentially, you have this massive opportunity to do exactly what you want to do, which is to be a writer and to write about something you love, and you're going to fuck it up. And I already knew that. And coming from this person who had been so good at pretending addiction didn't exist for a long time meant even more to me. And I said, you're right. And I went to my first meeting that night. And to make it very, very clear, the book would not exist if I hadn't gone to recovery, because I couldn't drink and write at the same time. I could not do both. So if I hadn't gotten into recovery, the gift of failure wouldn't exist, or it probably would exist, but in some crappy form that wouldn't have done very well. So getting sober for me is integral to this story. So yes, my life changed a lot, but a lot of that came down to the fact that, I went into recovery, and there are lots of ways to get sober. I happened to get sober in a 12-step program, which happened to be another great way to think about who I am as a human being, and why I do what I do, and what I can control and what I can't control, and all that kind of stuff. And all of that went into, and the other thing, the story I tell a lot about Gift of Failure. So right after Gift of Failure came out, Richard Branson has, the Virgin Atlantic guy, Virgin Atlantic, the Virgin guy. Yeah. He has a blog.
Not Steve Carell, not the 40-year-old Virgin, different guy. Virgin Airlines, the multi-million billionaire.
Richard Branson has on his own blog, a series about stories of failure. He loves those stories. And I was asked to write about my own personal failure. And I went to school that day to teach, and I told them about this thing. I said, this is really cool. I don't know what I'm going to write. I think I'm going to write this law school thing. And the kids, so on to me. The kids said, but that's not your biggest failure. And I said, it's not. And they said, no, it's that story you told us about your book when we were talking about rough drafts. And I said, oh, I can't tell that story. That story's too horrific.
Oh, wow.
And they said, well, but that's that's your biggest failure story. So you have to tell that story. And the story is that I wrote The Gift of Failure. I had too short of a timeline, which was my fault. That was under my control, and I set a really quick turnaround deadline. My agent even tried to talk me out of it. I did it anyway. I'm like, I can do it. It'll be fine. And I turned the book in the day after, and this sounds not like it's part of the story, but it is. The day after I turned my book in, I sustained a pretty significant head injury. I was thrown from a horse that I was training, and I lost my memory. It was horrible. I couldn't read. I couldn't write for a little bit. And with concussions comes depression. There's all kinds of stuff that can happen after a concussion, which, by the way, helped me have so much more empathy for my students, especially since I live in like hockey country, skiing country. So I had my agent and my editor went easy on me for a little bit, but then my edits came back, and essentially the edits from my editor were devastating. That the book was unpublishable. It sucked. The writing was good, but that my organization was horrible. And she used the word ghostwriter.
Wow.
Which, for those of you who don't know, a ghostwriter is someone who comes in and helps people who aren't writers write books. And I said, I can't do that. So the only way forward was for me to say to her, give me 2 probationary chapters. Like, let me have a shot at 2 chapters. But in order to do that, in order to get them right, you're going to have to tell me everything I did wrong and how to fix it. And I'm telling you, I filled a notebook. It was like we had a really long meeting, and she told me everything I had done wrong. And I worked on those 2 chapters, and she liked them. And then I got 2 more, and I got 2 more, and I got 2 more.
Can I ask, did you like the work that you had submitted, or did you not realize it was good until you got that feedback?
I didn't know. Writing a book is so different from writing essays. Like, I write in 1,200 word blocks, at the Atlantic and the New York Times and stuff like that. And those blocks are easily, so you can keep all that in your head. A good book is not just about good writing. It's about good organization. And, if you're going to tell a story, like, where's the story and where, and in the sections that are very how-to, and Gift of Failure has a lot of like scripts and how-to, and first do this and then do that. It has to be organized in a way that makes sense. Like, okay, preschool stuff here, kindergarten stuff here, and I was just all over the place. I couldn't organize that much book, and I had just done it too fast. And my editor was great. She said, and a lot of her writers have been journalists in the past. And she said, look, this is pretty common with journalists. It's just, it's a very different beast. If you've never written a book before, how can you know how to write a book? So she earned her money on that one, because she essentially line edited the book. Like, we would go 2 chapters at a time, and that's how we rewrote the entire book. Some of the content is the same, but much of it is different. It's a very different book. If that book had been published, it would have sucked. Which, as you can imagine, this time around, now that I'm writing this book, like, the stakes were super high. My first draft had to kick ass, because I had to show her that I was not going to be as much trouble this time around. And I'm so grateful, and I'm so happy to report I've gotten my edits back, and she was thrilled, and the edits are pretty light, relatively speaking, on this book. So I told that story for the Virgin Atlantic blog, and I got such a crazy response. Like, so many people who are writers wrote me and said, oh my gosh, thank you for telling that story, because people just kind of assume that you write this book, you get a few light, copy edits back, this comma should be a period, that kind of stuff. And it's devastating. I mean, it's exactly what you talked about in terms of, like, I write for the Atlantic and the New York Times, and you're telling me that I need a ghostwriter? What nonsense is this? But the other thing that happened is that now, when I tell my students about the importance of rough drafts, and I talk to my students about the fact that there is no such thing as really, there is no such thing as a final draft, because frankly, I would change stuff in the Gift of Failure. I've grown, I've changed. There are articles of mine I wish I hadn't written, or that I had done differently. I've changed as a human being. I'm not the same person. And so that process of writing a book that sucked and changing it into a book that was worthy of doing well and being out there meant that when it hit the New York Times bestseller list, that had a lot of meaning for me. And my family had watched me go through that. My kids had watched me go through that. So they saw the devastation of hearing that I'd really royally screwed. I mean, it was my own gift of failure story. And the gift for me now is I know how to write a book.
Right.
So when I turned this book in, if you could you reach behind me?
You got it.
When I turned this thing in, like when I turned Gift of Failure in, I knew I had no idea whether it was bad or good. I literally handed it off to my agent, my editor, and said, my husband said, like, "Are you happy with it?" I'm like, no idea. I could be wildly off the mark. I could have knocked it out of the park. I have no idea. When I handed this book in, I knew that it was good because I had these lists of things not to do that I learned the first time. And that's how my students learn, right?
Right.
I mean, it's such a humbling process, but it's so important to put ourselves through that if we're going to ask our students to go through that themselves.
But the idea of a book.
Yeah.
So The Gift of Failure, it is brilliant. It's amazing. It is an incredible book. You said something that caught my attention, though. You said when it hit the New York Times bestsellers list, you knew it was good.
Okay, well okay.
So,
no, it's not that I knew that it was good. It was that it meant more to me.
Okay.
Because I'd written it twice.
Yeah.
And my guts were in that book.
Yeah.
And if I had written a book, I don't know, I think if I had written a book that just sort of breezed through and was good the first time around and I didn't learn much from the process of it, would have been great. I mean, I still would have been in tears and excited and, thrilled, but I don't think it would have meant as much. And that said, like this second book means so much more to me because the fact that I have edits from my editor and you can't see this.
No,
you can see this.
Oh, I can see.
But
Okay,
they can't see. But like there are whole sections where that's the gray. So I use track changes in this. So there's whole sections here that have no edits in them.
Wow.
That like Gift of Failure was like there were every page looked like these are what edits look like, these little things on the side from my editor. Gift of Failure, every page had like 60 of them, and the fact that the feedback I'm getting is just different. It's like I had no idea what I'm doing, and now I have a sense of what I'm doing, and I could only get there by going through it. And that process has been incredible for me, and plus it's just I love the opportunity to learn how to be better.
So I'm curious about this relationship with you and your editor real quick, if that's okay, because I feel like
I should say, by the way, my agent is amazing and she edits before my editor ever sees it.
Okay.
So my agent reads for just basic stuff like she's not gonna she hardly ever digs really deep into the content and says but she edits everything for me before my editor ever sees it, so I've already had a first pass edit.
So I'm thinking about the correlation between a teacher and students, or you and your agent or your editor. So I say oftentimes that evaluating somebody else's work is a whole lot easier than reflecting on your own. Reflection is almost, it's like evaluating your own creation, which you already thought was perfect and amazing, so it's hard to find your errors. When you get back feedback from your editor or your agent, do you ever push back? And you might not think it because you love these people, and think, I'm way smarter than you. I know what I'm doing. I mean, I've got a book on the New York Times bestsellers list after all, just back off.
It's funny. I made this. So I have my two best friends are both writers, and we text each other all day long. They also happen to be my co-hosts on the #AmWriting podcast. And so we talk about writing all the time. We joke about the fact that our editors, most of 99% of the time, you'll get an edit back. And if it's an edit that you don't agree with, you're like, what do you think? You don't know. Yeah. But 99% of the time, if you have a good editor, whether that's as a journalist or as a book author, they're actually probably right, mainly because that's what they do. And I've been very lucky. I've had great editors from early blogging all the way through The Atlantic, The New York Times to, Gail Winston at Harper. there have been a few times that I've actually pushed back. I had, and I won't say her name, but if she hears this, which she may or may not know, she'll laugh. I wrote an article about Adam, wait, hold on. Yeah, which article was it? Sorry, it was about Mythbusters. It was Adam Savage from Mythbusters, and he was talking about. I wrote about the way Mythbusters works as a great educational tool, and there was this one quote that I just loved in the piece, and my editor said, "I think we don't need this," and I said, "No, that's going to be the quote," and I pushed back, and I was right. And that was the quote that like everyone sort of, it was so much fun. He was juggling, and his mom could hear him dropping the balls over and over and over again. And he said something like about the fact that wasn't the sound of failure, that was the sound of learning. And that was the quote she wanted to ditch. And I'm like, no, we're not ditching that quote.
Right.
But for the most part, I will say that for the most part, my editors are usually right, because often they'll have a bigger picture perspective. They'll have, there's certain words that I tend to overuse, and they'll have the ability to say, oh, you've already used that a bajillion times. We need to get that out. They just have a better and sometimes when you get even into a short piece, you'll lose yourself in the weeds. And that happens, especially when I'm translating research. My editors tend to be really good at saying, that's jargon. This is not for academics. This is for a popular audience. So let's get the jargon out and let's relate that more. And in fact, the word jargon probably appears in my edits from my editor in here, because I'm taking a lot of really crazy intense research, academic research that's really gobbledygook to most people, and sort of trying my hardest to translate that into something that someone who doesn't care to read the academic research, and it's something that's interesting, because and it's the other thing editors are really good at, is saying, yeah, this is where you lost me. And that sounds harsh, but I need to know that, because if I'm boring you, you're going to skip ahead, or you're going to put the book down. And I don't ever want you to skip ahead or put the book down. And so my editor's often really good at, oh, there you lost me. Oh, you lost me there too.
So you trust the feedback that you're getting.
I do.
You trust this person. There are people that are listening right now that are saying, maybe they're a teacher, and they're saying, okay, that's great. You got to choose the person that was giving you your feedback. I don't get to choose the person coming into my room, my space, giving me feedback, telling me the right way to do things. They're so slanted. They don't know the whole picture. They don't know my story. There might be
and that's often true.
It might be.
Well, I mean, there was a teacher, I talked to a teacher. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
there was a teacher I was talking to recently. I was giving a talk to teachers from technical schools. And there was a teacher saying that they had recently gone through accreditation again. And so what was going to happen was these people were going to parade through the school, and they're going to want to watch you teach. And so as a teacher who does a lot of this is technical education, so it's a lot of hands-on, sort of learning, where the students are not sitting in rows and they're not watching one person sage on the stage at the front of the room. But the people were coming around, and the teacher was smart enough to know that what those accreditation people wanted to see was kids in rows, sage on the stage kind of learning, because that's what these are people who don't spend any time in the classroom on their, maybe don't read a lot of the research. And so he had his students do what the accreditation people, just while they were walking through, do what they were expecting. And then the accreditation people went through, and then they got back to work the way they normally do. And the students looked in and they said, what was that? That's not how you teach. And he said, no, that's not how I teach, because the way I teach is about your learning. But I had to show them that I could play that game so that they can let us keep doing what we do here. And that is, I mean,
go ahead, say
it drives me bonkers.
We've already gone there.
Like, it drives me bonkers. Like, if we could, there's so many teachers that come to like Learning in the Brain, or all these great conferences where we learn about what really works for learning. And yet that research is not penetrating at the highest level, like accreditation people or your administrators. I mean, my panic when I step back, some of this, I get to do a session tomorrow on intrinsic learning and intrinsic motivation in the classroom. I changed a lot of what I did with my teaching because of what I was learning from the research. And but I lived in fear that my head of school or my principal or my whoever was going to come and look through the window of my classroom and see me sitting over here while my students are working over there together as a group. Because I know that what she wants to see from me is leadership in the classroom, standing there downloading my vast wealth of over-schooled knowledge to my, young disciples. And that's not what works for learning. Lectures don't work for learning very well. Big summative tests don't work for learning very well. But it's hard for an administrator who isn't up to date on the most recent research to know what formative assessment looks like, to know what sort of more peer-to-peer research looks like and why it's effective. So I lived in fear of people looking in and observing my classroom and not understanding what I was doing, even though I was fairly sure I was doing what was right and good for my students. And there was a moment when on Twitter, so Steve Strogatz is a math professor at Cornell. He is Steven Strogatz. Follow him. He's pretend. And he writes about math. He's a math professor at Cornell. He wrote a book called The Joy of X. He's written a book called Infinite Powers about calculus. Anyway, Steve at Cornell changed over from real lecture-based teaching to more small group and peer-to-peer teaching and that kind of stuff. And he was tweeting about it one day. And he was tweeting about the fact that, man, he cannot believe how much more the students are learning. It's really become apparent to him how much more powerful it is when they're sort of learning in this smaller group context. And so I was just curious. So I direct messaged him and I said, this is so great for you, blah, blah, blah. I'm so happy it's going well. How do you like it? And he's like, I hate it. I miss lecturing. I love lecturing. I love being the guy up on, I love the performance aspect of it, all of it. And I love that too. And actually getting to do large format speaking is one of the ways I get to do that. But from a learning perspective, it's not what works best, but it's how we were taught. And a lot of administrators and teachers who've been in the classroom for a long time and don't do a lot of research or don't do a lot of reading of academic research in order to stay on top of what works, are just teaching the way we were taught.
Right.
And I was taught lecture format. I was taught stay in your own. My math teacher would make us take notes in a notebook during class. And then our homework, we had homework, but then we also had to take our notes from the day that were in rough draft form and color code them in a notebook that would be graded as a test at the end of the term. And it was all about neatness and keeping things in rows. I don't really know what purpose that served. It was colorful and pretty.
Yeah.
And you were afraid to throw it away because you'd put so much effort into it. But, there are a lot of teachers who teach that way.
Right. In your world, I'm going to talk about the writing and bring a connection back. So in your writing, most editors and literary agents were not necessarily writers who had books on the New York Times bestseller list. They have a niche. They know their gift and they're performing their gift to help support you and your gift. In schools, most administrators, most leaders were teachers beforehand, and they were elevated, if I'll use that term, elevated, because somebody thought that they were a good teacher. So now they're automatically going to be a good leader. So then those leaders say, if you just do things the way I did them in my classroom, you'll be successful as well. So what advice do you have for teachers who aren't given that freedom to fail, who are told you just have to do things my way? Now you can shop around and go to get a different agent, different publishing house. You can go anywhere you want. Oftentimes teachers, they're stuck where they are. Do they poke the bear? Do they ask those questions? Do they just sit back and be compliant and play the game? How does that work?
Yeah, and this is, I was talking about this with you earlier, that so for me to go back teaching, to be an education journalist and to teach full-time is a really difficult place to be in, because I am a nightmare for my principal, my head of school, whatever administrator, because if the research, and if it's good research and the research is clear that X doesn't work and we're continuing to do X and I write about it, then the parents are going to come, or the other teachers are going to be like, look, what's Lahey doing writing about, Lahey says in the New York Times that we shouldn't be doing this. And it's really difficult for me to be on your staff. That said, I have had great bosses that have been willing to sort of listen and learn and stuff like that. But the problem is that school culture most of the time comes down from the top, and it's really, I can go do these sessions where I talk about intrinsic motivation in the classroom and how to sort of get parents on board with helping kids be more competent and autonomous and all that stuff. And then these teachers or a teacher could go to some workshop on project-based learning and come back and be like, I'm all about the project-based learning, but they're the only person in the building. And that project-based learning, you need whole school and culture buy-in for something like that. And so for one person to change school climate, it's just really impossible. And I mean, maybe you're like a Brutica Cafele and you can go and turn around an entire school and you can, force the school climate because you're doing it from the top. But one middle school math teacher, one middle school English teacher, it's going to be really hard for that one person to change school climate. And maybe it shouldn't be one person's place to change school climate just on their own anyway. But that tends to be the problem is for many, and the frustration for many teachers is that they're like, look, and I hear from these teachers all the time, look, I want to switch to formative assessment and not do as much cumulative assessment, but because we use this portal and the teacher wants to have, the administration wants me to have all these tests, which, no backsies, no redos, our policy, the policy at our school is no retakes. I hear this all the time.
Oh, God.
The policy at our school is no retakes. What is that about? That's not about learning. That's about a snapshot in time of a kid who either got it or didn't get it and who probably needs more help. And then, anyway, there's so much about that crap that drives me bonkers. But it's really hard for one teacher to change that. And so I think people can gently do things like, bring in Joe Bowler's copy of Mathematical Mindsets and say, look, it's our school policy to do timed math facts tests. But look, here's the research that shows that actually can promote math anxiety. Here's the research on it. Here's her website, ucube.org. And here's the research on why timed math tests promote math anxiety. And so can we possibly talk about changing that? But that can be really intimidating. And then you can also be seen as just a troublemaker, the squeaky wheel.
Absolutely. And I gave a talk today and had a few hundred people in the room. And I told them, if you go back to your buildings on Monday and say, Schmitto said, do this, you'll be looking for a new job next year because you got to identify your hill to die on.
Oh, you know who you need to talk to? Kelly Wickham-Hurst. Do you know Kelly?
No, I don't.
Kelly Wickham-Hurst has a nonprofit called Being Black at School. So she was a school counselor in Illinois, and she is a woman of color who would talk straight to her students of color who would come to her and say, look, I'm getting in trouble a lot, and those kids over there that are white are doing the same thing and not getting in trouble. And Kelly was willing to validate their experience and say what you're experiencing is real and true, and let me support you through that, and was also willing to call out her school on various things that they were doing that were just not equitable, that were downright racist, and she doesn't have a job anymore as a teacher. So, but Kelly has a much higher calling, and I think being Black at School and being out there and talking about the fact that that sort of colorblind approach, I don't see my color, that's just clearly not working, and not validating kids' experiences that they're really having in school is not going to get us anywhere. But she was a super squeaky wheel, and and she tells the story on Twitter all the time because it's a really important thing for teachers to see that sometimes it is going to be worth it for us to make a whole lot of noise, and especially when it comes to kids, because their futures are in our hands. And I'm certainly going to pick my battles, and I'm not always going to squeak super loud, but I'm going to squeak super loud when it means that a kid is not going to get a fair shake. And the things that I'm going to complain about are always going to come down to the well-being of my students, and whether or not they're learning. Because the over-parenting thing, I can be pissed off at the parents of my students all I want for interfering and meddling and getting mad at me because their kid got a B- and that kind of stuff. But it wasn't until I realized that was affecting their kids' learning that I got really pissed off, and that's when I started writing about this stuff.
And so people that are listening to this or watching this, they're sitting at home maybe and watching this, or they're listening on their way to work. They're probably alone listening. There's very rarely do people sit around in big groups and have podcast listening parties. tomorrow you're going to, well, maybe they will now. I don't know. Let's start something. Tomorrow you're going to have 3,000 educators, but there's 3,000 educators made up of probably 2,000 different schools.
Right.
That they're sprinkled all over the place. And so you do have these lone wolves out there right now that are hearing this message they're literally saying, preach it, amen. You're saying all this stuff, but then they're also having that battle in their head of, but I can't do this alone.
Right.
If I do this alone, I'll be on the street. I don't have that platform. I don't have the plan B. I don't have the backup plan. And their why might not be the same as Jessica's why.
Right.
How do they navigate this? Because it is all about kids, but maybe for them it's not failure. Maybe it's not standards-based grading or formative assessments, but what?
I mean, it's the same answer I give to a kid who says, my parents won't listen to me, and they're just pushing, and I need to be able to breathe, blah, blah. And the same answer I give to parents who are upset about how a teacher is doing something, or one of the other permutations in this is evidence. Mm-hmm. So as far as I'm concerned, what I really like to do is to give kids evidence about sleep and school start times, which drives people crazy, or evidence. I talk to them a lot about evidence about sleep, mainly because they're not getting enough of it, and it's so important to their memory consolidation and their mental health. So I talk a lot about that. But I'm very clear with them. I say, look, if you want your parents to change, if you want your parents to be less controlling, here's the study. Here's a study that you can show them that will help them understand. Mm-hmm. When I'm talking to parents, I could go to them and I say, look, here's the research I'm talking about so that you can understand that I'm not just blowing smoke out my ass. I'm talking about real, well done, well executed research that shows that kids who have highly directed parents are less able to deal with their frustration when they get stuck and are less capable of finishing difficult tasks. And when they come to my classroom, that means that they're not going to learn as well. So when you are highly directive and doing a lot for your kids, tying your kids' shoes for them and not giving them that opportunity to sort of work through their frustration and become sort of comfortable with their own frustration, they will learn less in my class. So you're trying to pave the way for them, and I'm telling you that what you're doing is undermining their learning. I also talk to them about undermining their motivation by paying them for their grades and stuff like that. But I come at it from whatever I think they're going to hear from me. And, sometimes it's the information that, kids that are more controlled and more highly directed and more sort of micromanaged lie to their parents more. Right. That's true as well. So if, I tend to hit them where I think they'll hear me, and some of the things I say are really hard. But, for example, whenever I speak to students, I ask 3 questions. I ask them how many are getting. I ask them to raise their hand if they're getting paid for their grades. I make all the adults in the room close their eyes. You're getting paid for grades. You're getting stuff for grades. But the big question I have for them is whether or not they believe in their hearts, really and truly. And I make them all close their eyes so no one's afraid of raising their hand or feeling ashamed. Do you believe that your parents love you more when you get high grades and less when you get low grades? The other thing that I do is I give all the kids my email address. And I say, look, I'm going to talk to your parents in 3 hours. You have 3 hours to email me with things you want me to tell your parents. And the number one thing they tell me to tell their parents is essentially what it comes down to is, please see me. I'm not my brother. I'm not my sister. I'm not you when you were my age. I'm not some imaginary kid you think you're raising. I am me, and you're not seeing me. So there's some huge disconnect between, what we think we're doing for our kids and how we think we're helping and what they're getting from us. And so when I say my response to that whole, I'm not my mother, I'm not my sister, I'm not my brother thing, I tell parents that connection with their kids really does come down to 2 very simple things. And that first one is that we have to love the kids we have, not the kids we wish we had. And usually 1 or 2 parents start crying at that point, and that's totally cool, because I think that means that you realize that maybe the kid you have is different from the kid that you thought you had. And maybe you haven't been seeing them for who they really are, and you've been seeing them for what you wish they would be. And kids know when we're not really seeing them. And then the second thing is that we can't just love our kids based on their performance. And, you know, the research on that is pretty clear too. When you look at the research of Harvard's Making Caring Common project, you know, what it comes down to essentially is that kids report that it's more important to them to do well academically than to be good people. And Rick Weisbord at Harvard's Making Caring Common project also asked them, what do your parents care about more, you being a good person or you doing well academically? And they said, oh, my parents care more that I do well academically than I'm a good person. So we're saying one thing to kids, oh, it's about the learning. All I care is that you're learning. And then we show them something completely different, which is, what I really care about is that you bring those A's home, and I want those A's, and I want those high SAT scores, and I want you to get into the college that I always envisioned for you, and that I need the sticker on the back of my car so that other people will be impressed when that sticker's on the back of my car and I drive into the school parking lot. People will be like, oh, that parent, she must be so great because her kid is going to super duper college because there's this sticker on the back of her car. And, you know, that was the one thing, actually, when my older son started looking at colleges, I said, the one thing you need to know right off the bat is there will be no sticker going in the back of my car, because where you go to school is such an important decision. And it has nothing to do with my being able to take credit for a name of a school. And where he's going to school is a great fit for him. The reasons he chose that school were well thought out, and I hope, anyway, that it went deeper than because U.S. News and World Report had it in whatever category. So,
I'm going to go back to that for you personally then. Yeah. For the rankings and success and what identifies success. So I'm going to grab this again. Sure. This, again, is the next book. It's paper copy right now, lots of notes all through it. Yeah. It is not the last book. The Gift of Failure raised the bar for you. Yeah. I mean,
I'm already writing the proposal for the book that comes after this.
So how do you define success for Jessica Lahey? Because you are not, you're not Malcolm Gladwell, you're not Alfie Kohn, you're not Carol Dweck, you are Jessica Lahey.
Yep.
If this next book gets a blip because it's the follow-up to The Gift of Failure, and get that spike for 6 months and then disappears, are you still a success?
That's such a great question. We talk about this on the podcast a lot. My co-host on the podcast, KJ Dell'Antonia, had a piece accepted at the New Yorker. I mean, bucket list, huge bucket list. It was a piece she wrote with Wendy Aarons, a humor writer that we both just love. And she admitted on the podcast that, yes, this was a bucket list. I mean, the New Yorker, but it was only digital. It wasn't on paper. Okay. So somehow it wasn't really the New Yorker. I mean, we do that kind of crap to ourselves all the time. And so what KJ and Serena Bowen, my other co-host, she's a many times over best-selling romance author. We're constantly wrestling with that, because like if Serena has a book come out and it doesn't hit the bestseller list, whereas 10 of her other books have, does that mean that book sucks? Or does that, what does that mean for her? And does she really does see that as a bit of a failure if she doesn't hit that bestseller list. But honestly, if I write for that reason, and I know this sounds like crap and BS, but I can't write with the New York Times bestseller list. And partially that's because it's a permanent thing. Like, I will always be a New York Times bestselling author. So what if my next book doesn't hit the New York Times bestseller list? It's like, you can't take that away from me. It's already there. I did not write this book to get on a New York Times bestseller list. It would be fantastic. But the reason I wrote this book is that I have 2 kids that I am raising under this genetic specter of addiction. They have a higher likelihood of being addicted during their lifetime. I teach kids who are addicted. I have friends who have kids who are addicted. And I'm just tired of hearing kids having to self-medicate themselves because we're not dealing with underlying stuff. And so when I had the idea for other books before I finally settled on this topic, and some of those other books were like Gift of Failure Part 2. Like, okay, you have something that works. Why not just write more gift of failure, if you because
Yeah.
if there's an appetite for that, why not write it?
Yeah.
Because that wasn't this book, and I said this from this will answer your question too. I had to write a full proposal for this book. When you go back to the same publisher again with the next book, so they had an option on my next nonfiction. So if I was writing Gift of Failure Part 2, I wouldn't have had to do a full proposal. I would have had to do chapter summaries and maybe one sample chapter. My agent was really smart about it. And she said, are you going to want to write this book if Gail Winston at Harper says no?
Mm.
And I said, I love Gail and I owe her my career, but yes, I'm supposed to write this book. So she said, fine, then you need to write the full proposal for that book so that we can turn around and go out to other publishers who might publish that book for less money, for a smaller press. But if you really are dedicated to writing this book, I will stand behind you, but we need to be prepared for the fact that addiction is a difficult topic. It's, it's not a feel-good topic, and Gail may not want it. So are you ready for that? And I said, yes, this is the book I'm supposed to be writing. So that's the answer to your question, which is, I'm not going to say I don't care, because clearly I care, and I want it to be well reviewed and I want it to be well received, but I also just want it to be really helpful. I wrote the book that I needed as a parent. There aren't a lot of great books out there that really look at the research on what we can control and what we can't around the risk factors for addiction. And that was the book I needed. So I was going to write that book either way. And yeah.
Do you think it was an easier decision to make because of the success previously? Or if the gift of failure had just been that blip, do you think this still would have come out?
Well, I wouldn't have gotten to this book things happen the way they happen because of the trajectory. And I don't know. I can't. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I know the next book.
That's the question I should have set up with. This is going to be a dumb question.
Right. No, it's not that. It's just that my entire career. So there's a great book about being a generalist that just came out by David Epstein. He wrote The Sports Gene, and his new book is called Range, and it's about being a generalist. And I have actually been a generalist I've been a political speechwriter. I've been a ski instructor. I've been what else have I done? I was a pediatric HIV researcher with the CDC. I worked for the Duke University Child Protection Team, helping assess kids for sexual and physical abuse. I've done all kinds of stuff, and I'm so grateful for all of those things, because all of those things led to wherever I am now. Gift of Failure led to this, and then the book I'm hoping to write after this is I could only have gotten to through this. So, I'm one of those big fans of the long and winding road version of education. And that's also the reason that I talk to kids all the time about the fact that they're not at all expected to know what they want to do with their lives now. Jesus. Because I didn't even realize I wanted to be a teacher until I was 28, and that was by accident. Yep. And but all the things I had done up to that point led me there, right, and were interesting. I know so much about pediatric HIV. I'm married to someone now actually who is an HIV doc. And I understand so much more about what he does at work because I did that work myself. I love that sort of here's how you get there kind of story. That's more interesting to me than, someone who I wanted to be a doctor from the time I was 2. And so I did pre-med, and then I went straight to medical school. And, it might make for a great surgeon, but I don't know that it makes for a particularly interesting, well-rounded person. Yeah. And those are the people I tend to like to talk to.
So good. So good. So good. And I know people are just making connections left and right to every. And it's crazy that we're having this conversation because you wrote a book called The Gift of Failure. And we've just covered the gamut of life. I don't even know how long we've been talking here.
I have no idea. It's 30.
It's Rich Roll, we're coming for you. But it's just so good.
Feel free to hit pause.
Right.
Go get a snack. We'll be here when you come back.
Well, let's try to bring it all together for people now. Especially for those teachers that are listening to this during their planning time right now. And they're thinking, oh my God, this is so good, but I got to take some action on this.
Right.
What is the mic drop moment? So you've got 30 seconds, you've got 5 minutes, whatever the case is. However long it takes you to get this out, feel free.
I dropped some of the stuff already. The love the kid you have, not the kid you wish you had. That's usually a mic drop moment. I already gave you that. I don't know what I have.
So the mic drop is rewind. Listen to it again.
I honestly, and there are a couple people, and I have to say, the love of the kid you have, not the kid you wish you had. There are a couple of us saying variations on that same theme. I think I saw Julie Lithcott-Hames recently has a quote about that as well. She also has this fantastic quote that I love. A couple of quotes, but she has this one fantastic quote I love about raising your kid to be ready. Oh, I'm gonna get it so wrong. Raising your kid to be ready for the road, not trying to prepare the road for your kid, something like that. I'm sorry, Julie. She's so brilliant. She, and I think there's someone else on Twitter who has said some variation on that theme as well. But honestly, loving the kid you wish you had, teaching the kids we have. And I say to parents all the time, look, if you promise to love the kid you have, not the kid you wish you had, I promise that if your kid comes into my classroom, I won't go into the classroom and teach the kids I wish I had and not the kids that are right in front of me. Because I can't walk into my classroom and say, hi, today I'd like to teach AP 11th grade English, AP language and composition. And if you're not there, tough. That's what I'm teaching today, because that's how I envision my teaching day going. I can't do that, especially in my rehab classroom where God knows what I'm going to get on a day-to-day basis. And so, you gotta go into it assuming that the kids know when we're not seeing them for who people know when we're not seeing them for who they are. And not only does that get in the way of them being their best authentic selves, it also can feed into that fixed and growth mindset thing. And you said earlier about labels, and I meant to say when you were talking about labels, I encourage everyone to go read Scott Barry Kaufman's book, Ungifted. Scott does a really good job in there about talking about when we put labels on kids, whether positive or negative, that really does shape them in a very specific and significant way. Bruda Kefele early this morning was talking about banishing at risk as a term, and I use that all the time.
Change it up to at promise.
Especially at the rehab, if I have a kid who's been in group homes and foster care, and we had a kid a while back who came to us. He'd had no dental care, he'd had no health care, he had barely been in school, and so our job was not to pick up where he should have been in 11th grade English. It was to get him 8 root canals because his teeth were falling out. So meeting kids where they are, meeting people where they are, and making sure kids feel seen and heard and loved. And there's a story I will tell tomorrow. I was teaching a kid. A lot of the kids I was teaching at the rehab were on a sort of a probationary kind of thing. Like they've been kicked out of school and they can come back if they complete rehab. And many of them are at an age where if they want to drop out, they can just drop out and not go back. And so, my job, one of my big jobs, my perception of a good day of teaching really did change. Like if I can get a kid who says he doesn't read to read, that's an awesome day. If I can get a kid to consider going back to school, obviously that's amazing. So I was strategically picked this writing assignment to get this kid thinking about the positive aspects of going back to school. And I asked him to think about one person, which is what Bruda Kefele talked about this morning, being that one person that changes a life trajectory. And so I asked him to write about one person that has had a positive impact on him at school. And he said, I can't write that. And I said, well, it doesn't have to be a teacher, just any. And he said, oh, it doesn't have to be a teacher. Okay, I can write that. And he wrote an essay about this guy. So this kid gets thrown out of class so often that he goes to this rubber room where the holding place for the bad kids. And the person who staffs that room is just this guy who's there to kill time with them. It's like the sitting there in detention time killing thing. But that guy, he said, was the first person who ever went out of his way to find out who this kid was. Wow. He said he taught him guitar. He asked how things were going at home. And he said to me, if I go back to school, I'll go back because of this guy, because he will be the only one who notices if I don't go back. He'll be the only one who misses me. And so when Bruda Kefele says stuff about being that one person, it happens
Right.
all the time. It's not just it's not an Twitter platitude. It's a real thing. We really do have that responsibility to be that one person who actually doesn't just see the kid we wish we had, but sees the actual kid. And frankly, if you have a kid that you're constantly in a negative cycle with, you're going to have to find a way to make that better. And I've had to do this with kids. I had this one kid who eventually actually got kicked out of our school for bad behavior and bullying. He and I got in this cycle of I expected him to be bad. He expected me to get mad at him, and we just went around and around and around like that until I had to basically follow this kid around and wait to hear or see or overhear him do something good so that I could praise him for that. Wow. And say, I saw you do this thing, and I can't even remember what the thing was, but it completely changed our relationship. Wow. And until he got thrown out. But our relationship, I had a relationship with this kid, and that was out of the question for us before. He didn't like me, I didn't like him. We had negative expectations for each other. But just noticing that he did something good, and by the way, calling home to tell his parents about it, changed our relationship and changed my relationship with the family until we got. Wow. But we do what we can do with what we got. Yeah.
That's real. Yeah. That's real.
But it's really, I think Twitter is so fantastic. As a profession, teachers are the largest users of Twitter. I follow 13,000 teachers on Twitter. It's a wonderful place. We're in a place right now where there's so many teachers on there that it can be used as a really effective tool, or it can be used as a way to just sort of garner followers and say pithy, stupid. If one more person says, I don't teach kids, I just give them the environment so they can learn, or the stupid Yates did not say that bucket quote. Yates never said that. Einstein also never said the thing about coming up with 1,000 ways to get the light bulb wrong. He never said that either. Go watch there's a podcast called Edu History 101.
Okay.
Go listen to that podcast.
No, don't do that. Don't do that. What I want you to do is I want you to pause and just rewind this one. Because what you just learned right now is why I love Jessica Lahey. Right there. I said it. I said that I'm like a groupie, but you just gained more groupies because this is amazing. You're not going to be able to walk the halls. Right now we're at the Opryland Resort in Asheville. I'm going to put this up ASAP because you're not going to be able to walk the halls without people just following you around, like taking pictures of you everywhere. And it's insane.
I actually flew fairly under the radar today because I haven't spoken yet.
Okay.
But it was so cool to watch, Brudy Cafele walking around after his keynote. People were just all over. And the coolest thing is because this is a place, it's all middle school teachers, and we're all here for the same reason, which is that we dig middle school and we love middle school students. There is no other place where I feel as understood as here, because most of the time when I say I love middle school students, unless there's like another middle school teacher in the audience or something, most of the time people are like, but they're just amazing. And middle school teachers are a very particular kind of person who, I like I said, I'm going to talk about this tomorrow. Our job is to watch kids screw up and to be their support while they learn how to be better people. And that is so much fun.
Absolutely.
And it's not for everyone, but if you find that place where you get to have an enormous impact and be around people who are as open and not jaded and just so, I refer to them as pupa people because they're like people that are becoming. And if you know anything about their brain development and you are willing to go there with the fact that we give them way more than their frontal lobes can handle, that they don't have executive function yet, and yet we're asking them to juggle all this stuff. If we go into middle school understanding that we're giving them more than we can handle, than they can handle, and then our job is to support them while they figure out how to handle it, man, it's the best job. It's
so true.
The best
so
job.
real. So real.
Such a good job. Anyway.
Speaking of
I think
good
we're
stuff.
like 2 hours.
We're good.
Something.
We're good. So we're going to wrap this up.
His battery's running low.
It's all good. So that's my excuse. Because otherwise I would sit here and I would just talk to you forever.
So there are more. So if you want gift of failure, frequently asked questions, YouTube. Actually, if you go to jessicalahey.com and you sign up there, you'll get this email back with like links to all the frequently asked questions. You'll get a bibliography of like basically what I love, my sort of most recommended professional development sort of articles, videos, my favorite YouTube educators, you know, all that kind of stuff. So that's all. Yeah, if you sign up at jessicalahey.com, you get everything in one big email. Which is
so good. So you get Jessica Lahey plus all the stuff that helped make Jessica Lahey, which is so good. So go do that.
Go do that.
Especially if you're leaving AMLE right now and you've got like a flight across the country and you've got 2 hours because you just listened to this for 2 hours. As soon as you get to where you got Wi-Fi again, if you're like me and too cheap to pay for the in-air Wi-Fi, go to jessicalahey.com, get all of those resources, get it all, and then start planting those seeds. Have those conversations with the people that you work with, so you don't have to do it alone, and you can start growing kids by growing.
And then have me come to your school.
Boom! There you go. There you go.
Actually, what's really fun is lots of schools are reading Gift of Failure as like a
book
community
studies.
read.
Yeah.
And so if you do it as a big community read, either through professional development or, you know, if you incorporate, here's the fun secret. There are certain funds for professional development, and there's certain funds that the Parent-Teacher Association tends to have. And so if you pool those funds, you can get a situation in which the whole school can read a book, whether it's my book or someone else's book. And then if you have like this book here is also fantastic. Devorah Heitner's Screenwise. Parents are asking all the time about like, what do I do about my kid? And so Devorah does the same thing I do, which is go to a school, talk to the kids, talk to the teachers, and do professional development, and then talk to the parents in the evening so that you get everyone on the same vocabulary page.
Yeah.
So that if a teacher goes to a parent and says, I want to talk to you a little bit about your kid's motivation, then the parent, if they have come to the event, are able to talk to the teacher about the same concepts with a similar level of understanding. And that's what's so fun about getting to go to schools and do that sort of thing.
So good. And that's where I first saw her. And then I went
where was that?
We'll talk off there. But even just this last year, I'll tell you this one right now. So just this last year was my first year in a school district up in Michigan. And you were presenting in Grosse Pointe. And Grosse Pointe is a fairly affluent community.
Which was my second time to Grosse Pointe, because the first time I went there, the power went out across the whole city.
Yeah. It's one of the places to be, if you will, air quotes, if you're not watching this. And I brought some of the administrators that I was just meeting, and I had just been working with for about a month to come see you. And you gave me street cred because they said, seriously, you believe in this stuff? That's awesome. So
cool.
It's amazing. So yeah,
very cool.
Bring her, because she will change lives, and then you don't have to say all that stuff that pisses people off.
Yeah.
You can pay her to do it.
And actually, the fun part is if you talk to me ahead of time and talk to me about like what's going on at your school and what you want me to address with the parents, or sometimes parents will email and say, this is pissing us off. I was at a school district in Indiana where they were changing over to standards-based grading, and the parents were flipping out because grades were going away. And so my agenda there was to help reassure parents that standards-based grading works, and here's why it works, and that they can calm down a little bit about the grades not being there. And so the nice thing about going to a school is you can really address what's happening at that school.
Yeah,
and
that's good.
It's really fun.
You're not just this person, this expert that lives up in Vermont, doesn't know what we're dealing with here in Indiana. You do know.
And then I also have to say some things that piss people off, like how much I hate portals and grading portals and stuff like that. So I can make people cringe a little bit, and it's really fun.
That's so good. So good.
My theory is if I haven't pissed off like one person in the audience, then I haven't done my job.
Well played. Well played. I can't wait to see who you piss off tomorrow. Let's do it.
I can't piss people off. These people are my peeps.
Yeah, well, we'll see. So again, thank you to Jessica Lahey, who just dropped so much wisdom. And I'm going to be going back and watching this over and over and over again on the loop. So you do that as well, and read her stuff, bring her in, listen to her speak. She's everywhere, and she's killing it for all the right reasons. So thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.